The glass sits on the marble countertop, and the afternoon light slices the kitchen in half. She watches the clear liquid flow, drop by drop, slowly, like someone seasoning a soup. The vial returns to the high cabinet, the gesture precise, almost artistic. Outside, the old man is seated in a rocking chair on the porch, looking at a garden he no longer clearly recognizes. She smiles, picks up the glass, and walks to him with her usual tenderness. "Your juice, dear. It will do you good." He drinks without question. She returns inside, and the silence of the house feels heavier than ever. Before we dive into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The house had always been too big for what happened within its walls. High ceilings, windows overlooking an old garden, wide hallways where footsteps echoed even when no one wanted to be heard. It was one of those impressive constructions people admired, but inside it carried the weight of a bygone era. His father had lived there since he became a widower, almost 10 years ago. His wife, the one who had truly loved him, had passed, taking with her the laughter that used to fill the rooms. Since then, the house had become a place of long silences and memories no one dared to disturb. He was 82, but until recently, he still climbed the stairs unaided, still ate breakfast alone, still read the entire newspaper before noon. He was a thin man, with broad shoulders that were beginning to stoop, but he maintained the posture of someone who had worked his whole life and knew the value of every achievement. His son, Robert, had built a business empire, real estate, investments, partnerships spanning 3 states. Robert was respected. Robert was, at times, feared. Robert had everything his father had dreamed for him, and then some. But Robert was also always too busy to notice what was happening inside his own home. That's why, 2 years prior, he had brought Frances. She was his second wife, younger, beautiful in a calculated way, with that smile that seemed rehearsed in front of a mirror before being used. He had told his father at the time that it would be good to have someone to look after him, to ensure he was well while Robert traveled, while Robert closed deals, while Robert built the future. The old man accepted without much discussion. After all, it was one less burden on his son's shoulders. And Frances seemed kind, solicitous, almost maternal. He thought perhaps the house might regain some warmth. At first, things did improve. Frances organized the house, hired cleaners, cooks, gardeners. Everything became tidier, more organized, more controlled. She made sure to be present at her father-in-law's meals, asked if he had slept well, if he needed anything. Robert praised her dedication. "You're an angel, Frances. My father is in good hands." And she would smile, lower her eyes modestly, and continue to play the role of the perfect daughter-in-law. But something began to change. It was subtle at first. Robert's father started refusing some meals. He said he wasn't hungry, that his stomach felt heavy. Frances insisted sweetly, "You need to eat, or you'll get weak." And he would try, swallow a few mouthfuls, but soon give up. The plate would return almost full, and he would go back to his room, tired, with an exhaustion that wasn't just physical. Weeks passed, and the transformation became impossible to ignore. The man who occupied that house began to disappear from within. It wasn't just his clothes becoming loose, or his belt needing another hole. It was his gaze becoming vaguer, his hands trembling as he held his teacup, his skin turning yellowish, almost translucent under the morning light. He still tried to maintain his routine, waking early, showering alone, coming down for coffee, but each gesture cost more, each step seemed higher, and each day, looking at himself in the bathroom mirror, he realized something was wrong, something that wasn't just old age. Frances, however, remained attentive. She bought vitamins, prepared special juices, consulted private doctors who came to the house and said it was normal, That age took its toll, that patience was needed. Robert believed every word. After all, who better than his wife to care for his father? Who else would dedicate themselves so much? He even started praising her publicly, at dinners, at charity events. "My wife is a blessing. She cares for my father as if he were her own." And everyone agreed. Francis knew how to put on an act, but there was someone who disagreed, someone who saw what others didn't want to see. His name was Joseph, he was 63, and he had served that family for over 15 years. Driver, caretaker, sometimes even a silent confidant. Joseph was discreet, a man of few words, but with keen eyes. He had spent years driving his old employer, listening to his stories, learning to respect the man who treated everyone with dignity. When his wife passed away, Joseph cried in silence because he knew something important had been lost in that house. Now, he observed the decline. He observed the changes. And unlike Robert, he was always nearby. He took the old man to the doctor, helped him down the stairs, stood ready in the garage, while Frances circulated through the house with her meticulous efficiency. And it was by always being there, on the sidelines, invisible as good employees often are, that Joseph began to notice the details. One morning, while tidying the car, he saw through the kitchen window. Frances had her back to him, manipulating something on the counter. There was a small, translucent vial which she opened carefully. Then the juice. The movement was quick, but not quick enough. A few drops fell into the glass. She stirred with a spoon, poured more juice on top, and took it all to her father-in-law, who was sitting in the living room, leafing through a magazine he could no longer properly read. Joseph felt a shiver. It might have been nothing, he thought. It might have just been a supplement, some vitamin. But the way she put the vial away, the discreet haste, the glance around before acting, all of it aroused a suspicion he could no longer ignore. In the following days, he started observing more. He noticed that the old man only worsened after the meals Frances personally prepared. He noticed that the juices, the ones she insisted he drink, always had a strange, almost imperceptible sweet smell. He noticed that, on mornings when Robert was home and had coffee with his father, Frances didn't prepare anything special. But when they were alone, she always had something ready, always something that would do him good. Joseph tried to speak up. Once, taking his employer back from the doctor, he quietly commented, "Are you eating properly, sir?" The old man sighed, tired. "I eat what I can, Joseph, but nothing seems to stay down." Joseph wanted to insist, but what would he say? That he suspected his employer's daughter-in-law, that he thought she was poisoning her father-in-law? It would sound absurd. Who would believe a driver against the word of an educated, well-dressed woman who did volunteer work and organized charity dinners? So Joseph did the only thing he could do. He started writing things down. Dates, times, symptoms the old man exhibited, the moments Frances entered the kitchen alone. He kept the notes in his pocket, waiting for the right moment, because he knew that if he didn't have proof, he would have nothing. And time was running out for the old man. Inside the house, the silence continued to spread. Robert's father spent his days increasingly withdrawn. He stopped coming down for coffee. He stopped trying to read. He spent hours lying down, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what was happening to his own body. He felt dizzy. He felt his stomach churn. He felt a profound tiredness, as if every cell was giving up. And worst of all, he felt fear that this wasn't natural, fear that someone somehow was doing this to him. But how could he say it? How could he accuse his own son's wife? How could he destroy what Robert thought was a happy marriage? The old man swallowed his fear, along with the medicines, along with the juices, along with the silence, and he was fading, day by day, like a candle burning itself out. Frances, for her part, maintained her routine with surgical precision. She woke early, tidied the house, supervised the staff, talked on the phone with friends, posted photos on social media showing her perfect life. In the afternoon, she prepared something for her father-in-law. In the evening, she dined with Robert, told him how his father was doing, feigned concern. "He's getting weaker every day, darling. I think we should call another doctor." Robert agreed, but he never had time. He always had a meeting, a trip, an unpostponable commitment, and Francis reassured him, "Don't worry, I'll take care of him." To care. That verb, which should signify love, protection, devotion, there inside that house, began to mean something else: control, eradication, slow death. And no one noticed. No one, except Joseph. One afternoon, Robert returned from a trip early. He entered through the back door, tired, wanting nothing more than a shower and a bed. But as he passed the kitchen, he heard Frances's voice. She was on the phone, speaking softly. "It won't be much longer. He can barely stand. A few more weeks at most." Pause. "Yes, after that, the house is ours. Robert will inherit everything and I'll convince him to sell. We'll travel, buy that apartment in Miami, and that's it." Longer pause. A soft laugh. "He doesn't suspect a thing." Robert froze. His blood ran cold. His heart pounded. He wanted to believe he had misunderstood, that it was a conversation about something else, about someone else. But the way she said, "The house is ours," how she laughed when she said he didn't suspect. It all fit together into a puzzle he had never wanted to assemble. He entered the kitchen slowly, without making a sound. Frances had her back to him, stirring something on the stove. On the counter there was a glass of orange juice, and next to it, discreet, almost invisible, a small, unlabeled vial. Robert picked up the vial. It was light, but what it contained was too heavy. "Frances," she turned, startled. For a second her face lost its composure, but soon the trained automatic smile returned. "Darling, you're home early. What a surprise. What is this?" He held up the vial. It's a vitamin for your father. The doctor prescribed it." "Which doctor?" Silence. "Which doctor, Francis?" I don't remember the name right now. It was a private consultation. You weren't there." "How many private consultations have you had without telling me?" She looked away. "Robert, you're being unfair. I'm just taking care of your father." "Taking care?" His voice rose, but it wasn't anger yet. It was disbelief, as if the ground was giving way beneath his feet. Taking care or killing. The silence that followed was absolute. Frances's eyes widened, but she didn't answer. Robert felt his legs tremble, because in that instant he knew. He knew everything, and the pain he felt wasn't just from the betrayal, but from the lost time, from the weeks he had ignored the signs, from the times he had thanked her for her dedication while his father wasted away. "Get out of my sight." He walked past her, taking the vial, and rushed upstairs. His father's room was in shadow. The old man was lying down, breathing with difficulty, his eyes half closed. When he saw his son enter, he tried to smile. "Robert, you're back." "Dad." His voice cracked. "Dad, what has she been giving you?" The old man blinked, confused. "Francis, she takes care of me." "No, Dad, she doesn't take care. She—" Robert couldn't finish the sentence. He showed him the vial. "This. Have you been taking this?" His father looked at the vial, and something in his gaze changed. A flash of recognition, of fear. She said, "It was a vitamin. It's not a vitamin." The two remained silent. The weight of the truth fell upon them like a ton of bricks. His father closed his eyes, and a tear rolled down his wrinkled face. "I knew it," he said, his voice weak. "Deep down, I knew it." Robert sat on the edge of the bed, held his father's hand and cried. He cried for his blindness, for his misplaced trust, for the woman he thought he loved and who, in reality, had never existed. He cried for the father he had almost lost, and he cried for himself, for the man who had been too naive to see the obvious. Frances tried to leave the house that night, but Robert stopped her. He called the police, called a trusted doctor, and asked them to analyze the contents of the vial. While he waited, he sat in the living room next to his father, who was now wrapped in blankets, trembling but conscious. Joseph appeared at the door, timidly, holding an old notebook. "Mr. Robert, I wrote everything down, the dates, the times. I saw her doing it many times. I tried to warn you, but—" Robert raised his hand, interrupting him. "I know, Joseph, I know." And then he did something he had never done. He hugged the driver. "Thank you. You saved my father." Joseph, with tears in his eyes, just nodded. The police arrived an hour later. The doctors confirmed. Arsenic, small doses administered over months. Enough to debilitate, to slowly extinguish, but not fast enough to raise immediate suspicion. Frances denied everything, of course. She cried, screamed, said it was a mistake, that she would never do such a thing. But the evidence was all there, the vial, the tests, Joseph's notes, and finally the confession recorded on her phone, which the police requested and found. She was taken away in handcuffs, still screaming, "I just wanted what was mine. I deserved it. I married you, Robert. I deserved this life." Robert didn't respond. He just watched the police take her away and then close the door. The house suddenly felt lighter, as if something toxic had exited through its walls. In the weeks that followed, his father began to recover. Slowly, but consistently. His appetite returned. His skin color improved. His hands stopped trembling so much. He started coming down for breakfast again, reading the newspaper, sitting on the porch and looking at the garden. And for the first time in months, he truly smiled. Robert sold the big house. He couldn't bear to be there anymore. He bought a smaller, simpler one, where he and his father could start over. Joseph stayed with them, now no longer as a driver, but as part of the family, because after all, he was the one who had seen what no one else wanted to see. He was the one who had the courage to doubt when everyone else believed. One morning, sitting on the new porch, his father turned to Robert and said, "You know, son, there are poisons that don't kill the body. They kill the soul of those who use them." Robert thought for a long time. Then he replied, "And there are people who save lives just by caring." The old man smiled. "Yes, there are." And in that moment, as the sun streamed through the trees and illuminated the new garden, both understood that true care isn't control. It's freedom, it's respect, it's selfless love. And that, even after the deepest betrayal, it's still possible to start anew. It's still possible to open the windows and let the air in. It's still possible to trust again. Joseph, sitting a little further back, watched them in silence, and deep in his chest he felt he had done the right thing, not out of heroism, but out of humanity. Because sometimes the only thing that separates tragedy from redemption is someone who refuses to ignore what they're seeing. The house, smaller and simpler, began to have sound again. Laughter, conversations, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the clinking of cups, the rustling of leaves in the garden, and above all, the feeling that despite everything there was still time. Time to live, time to forgive oneself, time to understand that true love doesn't need control, just presence. And as father and son toasted with coffee under the morning sun, life seemed to say that the worst was over, that the poison had been expelled, and that, finally, they could breathe. The months that followed were a period of slow and quiet reconstruction. Robert plunged into a painful process of self-discovery, questioning every decision he had made, every sign he had ignored, every time he had chosen work over presence. Business meetings continued, of course, but now he came home earlier, sat beside his father, and simply stayed there. Sometimes they talked. Other times they just shared the silence, and this, they discovered, was also a form of love. His father, in turn, rediscovered the pleasure of small things, the taste of warm bread in the morning, the sound of birds in the garden, the texture of the newspaper between his fingers. He didn't talk much about what he had been through. He didn't need to. The pain was there, etched in his memory. But he had learned that holding a grudge was giving Frances more power than she deserved. So, little by little, he let go, forgiving. Not her, necessarily, but himself, for having doubted his own instincts. Joseph became the invisible anchor of this new routine. He continued to tend the garden, organize the garage, and drive when necessary. But now he also sat at the table with them, had coffee, laughed at his employer's jokes. Robert insisted, "You're not an employee anymore, Joseph. You're family." And Joseph, who had served his entire life without expecting recognition, finally allowed himself to accept that place. He belonged there, and that was enough. One afternoon, his father found an old letter, hidden between the pages of a book he hadn't opened in years. It was from his first wife, written shortly before she died. It read, "My love, if one day this house loses its light, don't blame time. Open the windows, let the wind in, and remember that true love doesn't imprison, it liberates." He read it, reread it, and understood. Frances had never loved. She had only possessed. And there was a brutal difference between the two things. Robert, reading the letter, felt a tightening in his chest. He thought about how blind he had been. He thought about how he had confused control with dedication. And he promised himself he would never make that mistake again, that he would learn to see beyond appearances, that he would listen to the signs, even the most discreet ones, even those that came from those without a loud voice. Life went on. Winter arrived and brought thin rains that washed the garden. Then came spring, and the flowers began to bloom again. His father planted rose bushes in the flower bed as he used to do. Joseph helped dig the holes, fertilize the earth, water the seedlings. And Robert, who had never been interested in gardening, picked up a shovel and joined them. The three, dirty with soil, smiled at each other. They didn't need words. That was rebirth. There were difficult moments, of course, nights when his father woke up sweating, dreaming of the bitter taste of the juices, of Frances's cold gaze. In those moments, Robert or Joseph would appear, bring water, turn on the light, and stay there until he fell back asleep. The trauma didn't disappear overnight, but it gradually lost its strength. It was being replaced by new, lighter, truer memories. Frances was tried, sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted aggravated assault. During the trial, she tried to play the victim, saying she suffered pressure, that Robert neglected her, that her father-in-law scorned her. But the lawyers presented the evidence. The vials, the toxicology reports, the recorded conversations, Joseph's testimony, and the truth, cold and incontestable, came to light. She hadn't acted out of desperation. She had acted out of greed, out of ambition, out of vanity. She wanted the house, the money, the status, and she was willing to kill for it. Robert watched the trial from beginning to end, not for pleasure, but out of necessity. He needed to see the end of it. He needed to hear the sentence, see the handcuffs, understand that the woman he once loved, or thought he loved, was real and dangerous. When the sentence was read, he felt no relief. He felt only a tired emptiness, as if closing a chapter that should never have been written. His father did not go to the trial. He said he didn't want to see her again, that he had already spent too much energy on that, and that he preferred to use the time he had left to live, not to dwell on the past. Robert understood and respected that. In the new house, small and full of light, a routine was organically established. Coffee at 7 in the morning, walks around the neighborhood at 9, a simple lunch at noon, reading in the afternoon, conversations on the porch at dusk. Nothing grand, nothing luxurious, just life happening at the right pace, without haste, without fear. One night, after dinner, his father turned to Robert and asked, "Do you miss her?" Robert thought. Then he answered honestly, "I miss the woman I thought she was. But that woman never existed. So deep down, I guess not." His father nodded, satisfied. "Good, because the absence of someone who hurts you is not loss. It's liberation." Joseph, who was doing the dishes, listened and smiled. He, who had lived so many years on the sidelines, had learned that the best lessons came from the most improbable moments, and that sometimes wisdom wasn't in books or diplomas, but in the scars life left behind. Time passed. His father celebrated another birthday. 83 years old, celebrated with simple cake and cheap wine, but with sincere laughter and tight hugs. Robert gave him an old-fashioned wristwatch, one with ticking hands. "To remind you we still have time," he said. His father put on the watch, listened to the sound, and felt his eyes well up. Joseph got a new chair for the garden. "For you to rest after taking care of the plants," his father said. And Joseph, who had cared for others his whole life and never asked for anything, accepted with a shy, grateful smile. That night, the three sat on the porch, under the stars, and remained silent. A different silence from the one that had inhabited the old house. This one was full of peace, of acceptance, of new beginnings. The wind blew softly, bringing the scent of the rose bushes that had finally bloomed, and the moon, round and clear, illuminated the garden as if blessing that piece of land where three men had learned to live again. "Let's toast," his father said, raising his coffee cup, "to what was lost and to what can still be saved." Robert and Joseph raised theirs. The sound of the cups touching was soft, but it carried the weight of redemption, of gratitude, of love that needs no proof to exist. And as they drank in silence, each thought about the path that had brought them there, the wrong choices, the lessons learned, the scars that were now part of who they were, but above all they thought about the future, about the tomorrow that was yet to come, and the certainty that no matter what happened, they would face it together, because in the end, what mattered wasn't the size of the house, or the value of the bank account, or social prestige. What mattered was having people by your side who truly saw you, who protected you when needed, who reminded you that living isn't just surviving, but being present, with an open heart, even after pain. The night advanced. The cold began to settle in. They went inside, closed the windows, but left the curtains open, because they had learned that light needs to come in, always. And when his father went up to his room, Robert and Joseph stayed in the living room talking softly. "Do you think he'll be okay?" Robert asked. Joseph looked at the ceiling, thoughtfully. "I think so. He's stronger than he seems, and now he knows he's not alone." Robert agreed, and for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. It wasn't a perfect peace, free of doubts or fears, but it was a possible peace. Real, and that was enough. Upstairs, in his room, his father lay down in bed and looked at the ceiling. He thought of the wife who had passed. He thought of the woman who had tried to kill him. He thought of the son who had saved him. He thought of the driver who had never given up on him. And he concluded that life, despite everything, was still worth living. Because as long as there were people willing to fight for what was right, for what was just, for what was human, there would be hope. He closed his eyes and slept. And, for the first time in months, he had no nightmares. The next morning dawned with bright sun and a clear sky. His father woke early, descended the stairs slowly but steadily, and prepared coffee for everyone. When Robert and Joseph appeared in the kitchen, they found the table set, the bread warm, the smell of fresh coffee filling the house. "Today I'm taking care of you," the old man said, smiling, and the two moved, sat at the table. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, each sip. They talked about the day ahead, about plans for the garden, about the movie they wanted to watch that night. Simple things, things that just a few months ago seemed impossible. After coffee, they went out to the garden. His father watered the rose bushes. Joseph trimmed the lawn. Robert swept the dry leaves. And as they worked side by side, they understood that this was healing, not an instant, magical cure, but a cure that came little by little, with time, with presence, with shared affection. When they finished, they sat on the wooden bench Joseph had built under the shade of the old oak tree. The silence was comfortable, the kind of silence that only exists between people who truly know each other. "Dad," Robert said, breaking the silence, "I wanted to apologize." The old man turned, surprised. Apologize for what? For not seeing, for not realizing, for trusting blindly. His father placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You trusted because you had a good heart, and that's not a flaw, Robert. It's a virtue. The mistake was hers, not yours. But I should have seen it." "You should have," his father agreed, "but you didn't. So now what? Are you going to spend the rest of your life blaming yourself, or are you going to learn and move forward?" Robert swallowed hard. He nodded. "Learn and move forward." "Then it's settled." His father smiled. "Because I forgive you. And you need to forgive yourself too." Joseph, who had been listening in silence, discreetly wiped away a tear. That moment, simple and true, was worth more than any fortune. It was worth more than any title. It was humanity in its purest state. Weeks turned into months. The routine solidified. His father gained weight. Color returned to his face. Energy returned to his movements. He started telling stories from his youth again, laughing at old jokes, singing while watering the plants. Robert, watching his father reborn, understood the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't what you had, but who you had by your side. He began to delegate more at work. He hired trusted managers, reduced his travels, and started working from home whenever possible. And he discovered that the company continued to run perfectly. He discovered that he wasn't indispensable, and that his presence at home was far more valuable than he had imagined. Joseph continued to tend the garden with dedication. But now he also offered opinions on dinners, chose the movies they would watch, suggested weekend outings. He had stopped being the invisible employee and had become an essential part of that improvised but genuine family. One day, his father received a letter. It was from Frances, from prison. He hesitated before opening it. He thought about throwing it away, about not giving her another second of attention, but something made him open it. The letter read, "I know you'll never forgive me, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm not a monster. I'm a person who made terrible decisions for selfish reasons, and now I'm going to pay for it. I hope you live well. I hope you're happy, because deep down, you deserve it. You always deserved it." He read the letter 3 times. Then he tore it into small pieces and threw it in the trash, not out of anger, but because he didn't need to carry that burden. Frances had made her choices, he had made his, and their paths diverged forever. There was nothing more to say. He told Robert about the letter, who merely shook his head. "She still doesn't get it," he said. "It's not about forgiveness or monsters. It's about responsibility, and she needs to bear hers." His father agreed, and they never spoke of Frances again. Years passed, slowly but surely. His father reached 85, then 87. Robert aged 2, his hair grayed, wrinkles deepened. Joseph, always discreet, remained there, loyal as he had always been. And the three together built a life worth living. There were illnesses, of course, there were scares. There were nights in the hospital and controlled medicines. But there were also birthdays, short trips to the beach, football afternoons on TV, dinners with new friends. Life, with all its ups and downs, continued. And they were there, together, facing it. One day, sitting on the porch as they always did at dusk, his father looked at the orange sky and said, "You know, I almost died. I died inside before dying outside, but you brought me back, and for that, everything was worth it." Robert and Joseph didn't respond. They just held the old man's hands, one on each side, and stayed there, watching the sun set, listening to the crickets chirp, feeling the cool night wind arrive. And in that moment, in silence, the three understood that true care is not about controlling, or possessing, or manipulating. It's about being present. It's about truly seeing the other. It's about protecting without suffocating. It's about loving without expecting anything in return. Night fell completely. The stars began to appear. And inside the small but lively house, the light remained on. Because they had learned that, no matter how dark the night, it's always possible to keep the light on. It's always possible to start over. It's always possible to choose love. And that, in the end, was the only lesson that mattered. Time continued its course, indifferent to human dramas, but gentle with those who learned to respect it. His father, now almost 90, had become a kind of silent sage of the neighborhood. Neighbors came for advice. Children stopped to listen to his stories, and he, always kind, shared what he had learned, that life is too short to be wasted on hatred, and too long to be lived without love. Robert, in turn, discovered fatherhood in an unexpected way. Not biologically, but emotionally. He started volunteering at a senior living facility, sometimes taking his father along, and there, seeing so many abandoned elders, so many stories interrupted by loneliness and disinterest, he understood the value of what he had almost lost. He understood that every minute beside his father was a gift that many didn't have. Joseph, already 70, remained tireless. He said that working kept him young and that he preferred to die on his feet, tending the garden, rather than wasting away in a chair without purpose. His father would laugh, saying Joseph was stubborn as a mule, and Joseph would retort that his employer was the stubborn one, still insisting on climbing stairs alone at 90, and both would laugh, like the old friends they were. One Sunday morning, his father woke earlier than usual. He slowly descended the stairs, made coffee, and sat on the porch with an old notebook he had found in the cabinet. He began to write. He wrote about the life he had lived, about the mistakes he had made, about the people he had loved. He wrote about the wife who had passed, about the son who had built an empire, about the driver who had become a brother. And he wrote about Francis, about the poison, about the proximity of death, and the miracle of new beginnings. When Robert came down, he found his father writing. "What are you doing, Dad?" "Leaving a record," the old man replied, without stopping writing, "so that no one forgets that life always offers a second chance. You just have to have the courage to accept it." Robert sat beside him and remained silent, watching the trembling but determined hand trace words on the yellowed paper. And he thought that this was the greatest legacy his father could leave. Not money, not possessions, but the wisdom of someone who had survived the worst and chose not to let bitterness win. Weeks later, the notebook was finished. His father handed it to Robert. "Keep this, and if one day you forget why it's worth fighting, read it." Robert stored the notebook in a wooden box, along with old photos, letters from his mother, and a pocket watch that had belonged to his grandfather. They were priceless treasures, carrying memory, affection, history. Winter arrived again, more severe than in previous years. The cold bit hard, and his father started going out less. But even inside the house, he kept his spirit alive. He read, listened to music, told stories to the grandchildren Robert never had, but whom the neighbors gladly lent, knowing the old man always had a sweet treat or a funny story stored away. One afternoon, he had a fall. Nothing serious, but enough to scare them. The doctor came, examined him, said he needed to be more careful, that his bones were no longer the same. Robert wanted to hire a nurse, but his father refused. "I've had someone caring for me before. It didn't work out," he said with a bitter smile. "I prefer Joseph. He doesn't put anything strange in my juice." The joke, though painful, drew laughs from the three, because humor, they discovered, was also a form of healing, a way of saying that the past no longer defined them. His father recovered from the fall, but became slower. He started using a cane, asking for help to climb stairs, going to bed earlier. Robert and Joseph took turns caring for him, always attentive, always present, and the grateful old man repeated every day, "Thank you for not giving up on me." One night after dinner, his father asked them to watch an old movie he loved together. It was a Western, one of those black and white ones, with cowboys and duels at sunset. Robert found it outdated, but said nothing. Joseph made popcorn, and the three settled on the couch, covered by blankets, as the TV projected shadows on the wall. In the middle of the movie, his father dozed off. His head fell slightly to the side. His breathing became slow and deep. Robert and Joseph exchanged glances, smiled, and continued watching in silence. They didn't wake him. They let him rest there, safe, protected, loved. When the movie ended, his father woke with a start. "Is it over?" Robert nodded. "It's over, Dad." The old man sighed. "What a shame. I like the ending." Joseph laughed. "We'll watch it again next week." And his father, his eyes twinkling, agreed. Yes, next week. But next week never arrived as they expected. 3 days later, his father woke with a high fever. They took him to the hospital, did tests, discovered pneumonia. The doctors said it was serious, but treatable. Robert didn't leave his side. Joseph brought clean clothes, food, words of comfort. His father spent 5 days hospitalized. In moments of lucidity, he held Robert's hand and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm not leaving yet. We have movies to watch." And Robert, his eyes full of tears, believed him. On the 5th day, the fever broke. The doctors were surprised by his recovery. "He's strong," they said, "stronger than he seems." Robert and Joseph knew this. They knew that his father was strong not only in body, but in will, in stubbornness, in the love for life that, despite everything, still pulsed within him. When he was discharged, his father returned home like someone coming back from a war, tired, but victorious. And that night, sitting on the porch under the starry sky, he said something neither of them would forget. "You know, I could have died in that old house. I could have slowly faded away, with no one noticing, but you saved me. And it wasn't just my body you saved, it was my will to live. It was my faith that there is still goodness in the world." Robert and Joseph didn't respond. They just stayed there in silence, letting the words echo into the night. The years continued to pass. His father turned 92, Robert turned 60, Joseph reached 75, and the three, together, witnessed the passage of time with gratitude, because it wasn't time that mattered, but what they did with it. There were more scares, more hospitals, more nights of vigil, but there were also parties, laughter, conversations that lasted for hours. There was the planting of new rose bushes, the construction of a small pond in the garden, the adoption of a stray dog that Joseph brought home and which became the darling of the house. And there was, above all, the certainty that they had made the right choices, that they had learned from their mistakes, that they had transformed pain into wisdom and fear into courage. One night late, his father called Robert and Joseph to his room. He was sitting on the bed, with the notebook he had written years earlier in his hands. "I want to read something to you," he said, and he began. "Life taught me that true love is not what controls, but what liberates. It is not what possesses, but what shares. It is not what demands, but what offers. And I, who almost lost everything, learned this in the most painful way. But I also learned that it's never too late to start over, that even after the poison, healing is possible, and that there are people in this world willing to fight for us, even when we don't deserve it." He paused, looked at the two, and continued. "You were those people for me, and I will never be able to thank you enough." Robert and Joseph, with tears in their eyes, sat beside the old man. And there, in that simple room, under the dim light of the bedside lamp, the three cried together, not out of sadness, but out of relief, out of gratitude, out of love. And when the crying ceased, his father closed the notebook, lay down, and fell asleep with a smile on his face. Robert and Joseph left the room in silence, closed the door slowly, and went downstairs to the living room. "He'll be okay," Joseph said, more to himself than to Robert. "Yes," Robert agreed, "he will," and both believed it. Life followed its natural course. His father started sleeping more, eating less, speaking with more pauses. The doctors said his body was preparing, that it was natural, that there was nothing to do but make his days as comfortable as possible. Robert understood. Joseph did too. And instead of fighting the inevitable, they decided to celebrate every moment they still had. They took small trips around town, sat in parks to watch children play, returned to places where his father had been happy in his youth. And in each place, he told stories, laughed, remembered, and Robert and Joseph recorded everything in their memories, knowing that those were treasures they would carry forever. One spring morning, his father asked them to sit in the garden. The rose bushes were blooming, the pond sparkled under the sun, the dog slept at the foot of the old oak tree. Everything was at peace. He looked around, took a deep breath, and said, "This is the most beautiful place in the world." Robert smiled. "It's a simple garden, Dad." "It's not the garden," the old man replied. "It's you. You make this place beautiful." Joseph, who was watering the plants, stopped. He turned around, and for the first time in his life, he let the tears flow freely. That afternoon, the three stayed in the garden until sunset. They talked about everything and nothing, about the past, the present, and the uncertain future. And when night came, they went inside for dinner. It was a simple meal, but full of meaning, because everyone knew, without needing to say, that every moment together was precious. After dinner, his father went to his room early. He said he was tired. Robert and Joseph helped him lie down, covered him, and said good night. He held both their hands for a moment, squeezed them tightly, and said, "Thank you for everything." And then he closed his eyes. That night, he slept in peace. He did not wake again. Death came gently, as he deserved, without pain, without despair, just a tranquil slide into eternal silence. Robert and Joseph found him in the morning, still lying down, with the same serene smile on his face. They cried. Of course they cried, but amidst the tears, they also felt gratitude, because he had not departed poisoned, alone, in a cold house. He had departed loved, surrounded by affection, in a house that breathed life. The funeral was simple, as he had requested. Few attendees, but all true ones. Neighbors, friends from the senior living facility where Robert volunteered, people his father had helped over the years, and, of course, Robert and Joseph standing by the coffin, firm, honoring the memory of the man who had taught them what truly mattered. After the burial, they returned home in silence. The house seemed empty, but not abandoned, because his father's presence was still there, in every corner, in every object, in every memory. Robert and Joseph sat on the porch, as they always did, but now there were just two of them, and the silence, though heavy, was also comforting, because they knew they had done everything right, that they owed nothing, that they had loved until the end. "He had a good death," Joseph said, breaking the silence. "Yes," Robert agreed. "He did." And both understood that, in the end, that was the greatest blessing anyone could have, a good death, surrounded by love, without regrets, in peace. The following days were about adjustment. The house felt different without the old man's presence. But Robert and Joseph continued living together, tending the garden, maintaining the rose bushes, feeding the dog. Because that house now was theirs. And carrying on his father's legacy was the most beautiful way to honor him. Robert found among his father's belongings a letter addressed to him. He opened it with trembling hands. "My son, if you are reading this, it's because I have departed. Don't be sad. I lived a long life, made mistakes, but I also loved. And in the end, I was loved. That's more than many achieve. Take care of Joseph. He is more than an employee. He is family. And remember, true love doesn't imprison. It liberates. Live free. Live well. And never forget that. Even after the poison, healing is possible. Always." Robert read and reread. Then he put the letter back in the same place where he had kept the notebook, and he swore to himself that he would never forget. Joseph, in turn, continued to tend the garden with the same dedication as always. He said it was his way of keeping his employer alive. Every rose that bloomed was a tribute. Every tree that grew, a thank you. Months passed. The pain of loss gradually diminished, giving way to a gentle longing, one that warms the heart instead of chilling it. Robert returned to work, but with more balance. Joseph continued in the garden, but now also read, studied, discovered new interests, and together they built a new routine, different but equally significant, because they had learned that life doesn't stop, even when we lose someone, and that honoring the memory of those who have passed is to live well, to live fully, to live with purpose. One afternoon, a year after his father's death, Robert and Joseph sat on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. The garden was beautiful, the rose bushes covered in flowers, the pond reflecting the colors of dusk. "He would be proud," Joseph said. "Yes," Robert agreed. "He would." And, in silence, they toasted, not to the past, but to the present, not to pain, but to healing, not to the poison, but to the love that had triumphed, because in the end, that was the true lesson, that even after betrayal, poisoning, and the proximity of death, it's still possible to be reborn. It's still possible to love again. It's still possible to live with dignity, with joy, with hope. And as the sun dipped below the horizon and night slowly arrived, Robert and Joseph understood that their father's story had not ended with his death. It continued in them, in the choices they made, in the way they lived, in the love they shared. The old man had taught without knowing it that true love is not what controls, but what liberates. It is not what suffocates, but what allows one to breathe, and that there are poisons that don't kill the body, but the soul of those who use them. Francis, in her cell, carried that weight. His father, wherever he was free. And Robert and Joseph, sitting under the stars, knew they had done the right thing, that they had saved not just a life, but the very humanity that inhabited that house. Night advanced. The cold set in, but they didn't go inside immediately. They stayed there, watching the stars, listening to the wind in the trees, feeling the old man's presence around them. Because love, when it's true, doesn't die. It merely transforms, and it continues to guide, protect, illuminate. "Let's toast," Robert said, raising his empty cup, "to what was lost and to what can still be saved." Joseph raised his, and in silence they repeated the toast they had made so many times beside his father. The imaginary sound of the cups touching echoed in the night. And somehow, both felt that the old man was smiling. Because the story, after all, was not about death. It was about life, about new beginnings, about forgiveness, about love. And as the stars shone in the dark sky, Robert and Joseph understood that they had survived not only the poison, but also the fear, the guilt, the pain, and that now, finally, they were free to live without the weight of the past. The house, small and simple, breathed peacefully. The open windows let the wind in. The scent of the rose bushes filled the rooms, and in every corner, the old man's presence remained alive, not as a ghost, but as a legacy, as a lesson, as eternal love. And when they finally went to bed, Robert paused at the door of his father's room. He looked inside, saw the empty bed, and smiled. Because it wasn't emptiness he saw. It was fullness, it was history. It was the certainty that despite everything, they had done the best they could. And that was enough. Life would continue. Mornings would come, coffee would be brewed, the garden would be watered, and gradually the pain would give way to sweet remembrance, the kind that doesn't hurt but caresses, because true love never dies. It just learns other ways to exist. And in that house, small but immense in meaning, love would continue, forever. If this story touched your heart, like, comment and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered.